Hello friends, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Dreamy Dice, and today I will be walking you through my process for how I make this set of dice called Be Happy. That being said, a quick disclaimer before we get into the how-to. I am more than happy to share education and techniques. All I ask is that you please not attempt to exactly replicate this design, as it is pretty close to my heart and a relatively signature design of mine. Thank you very much, appreciate it, let's get into it. So I already have my resin divided into two, and I am adding some Piñata Blanco Blanco for my white section, about 8 drops or so for about 10 ml of resin, and then just mixing that up. This is the first step for any of my cloud techniques. I always use an opaque white. So for our translucent layer, I'm doing 2 drops of Pixis Sunflower Yellow and then 1 drop of Pixis Spice. And this is going to give us our honey-colored base, but I did a little oopsie here. I added too much of the spice and I didn't want the color to be too dark, so I was scooping out some of the excess alcohol ink. You know, sometimes you make mistakes and you just have to work around them, so I wanted to show that part. And the last element to our translucent base is going to be 1 drop of Brea Reese Iridescent Glitter, and then just mixing that up nice and thoroughly until everything is combined, and we are ready to do our pour into my blank molds. Also here I'm doing a little bit of a color test on the lid of my blank molds, since I'll be putting resin here anyway, and then just really quickly degassing and getting rid of some of those bubbles with my heat gun. Now, this is a pour in blank molds. I'm pouring them about 3/4 of the way full or so with my translucent layer. Blanks are similar to dice, but they are smaller in size and they don't have any numbers. And you'll see why we are using these a little bit later, but filling everything up about, again, 2/3 of the way or so, and then using my excess to cover the cap section. This is going to help us try to avoid bubbles and voids as much as we possibly can. And after we have our translucent layer poured and the caps covered, it is then time to use a pipette and slurp up some of this opaque white resin. And just like all of my cloud pours, what I do is I insert the pipette pretty much all the way down into the bottom of the mold, start squeezing there, and then I slowly just swirl and move the pipette around while trying to keep consistent pressure to continue to extrude that opaque white resin into the translucent base, and that is how I get that kind of cloud effect. When that is all finished, it is once again time to degas really quickly with the heat gun and then roll the cap of my blank mold on. I find this is the best way to put it on by just kind of slowly rolling it from one end to the other and pushing down really firmly to make sure that all of my alignments are in place and all of the excess resin can kind of squeeze out of the sides and not give a super thick layer on top that we call lifted faces. When that is done, it goes into the pressure pot for 24 hours, comes out, the top comes off, and then it is time to get all of these little bits of flashing off, and especially out of those indicator dot areas, and then to finally pop our blanks out of the mold, make sure that they look all good, there are no bubbles or voids or anything that need to be filled, and after this, we can move on to the decorating stage. There are so many ways that you can decorate blanks. What I am doing for this set is I'm using self-adhesive nail stickers. You can also find water slide nail stickers, but I've personally never worked with them, so I can't really give any advice there. I like these because they're just easy. You peel them off, you stick them on, bing, bang, boom, you're good. And that is precisely what you will see me doing here. This is a very long process. It takes anywhere from about 1.5 hours to 2 hours to do a single set. So I did speed it up quite a lot here, and I'm only showing you one of the dice. But essentially, I'm just going around and placing bees. And again here, I wanted to show you a little mistake. I wasn't happy with the placement of this bee, so I started trying to peel the nail sticker off. It ripped part of the way through, boohoo, so I then scraped it off the rest of the way with my nail. This is how I get nail stickers off when I'm not happy with the placement. Regarding placement, this is also something that you will just kind of learn and get used to with time. I try to place all of my decals kind of off to the side or in corners because the center of the die is where the number is going to be, and I don't want all of these nice little details getting blocked off by the number when it's painted. Next, I move on to the flower portion, and for some of these, I like to have them only on one side of the die. For others, I like to have them overlapping several sides, which I think kind of brings the whole design together. But just like the bees, I'm simply placing these where I feel it's most appropriate, trying to keep them away from the center of the die, and then also adding some of these green leafy details to some of the flowers and some of the corners, which I think just gives a really nice little pop of color and some good variation for the set. Also, sorry for my hand placement, keeping it centered there was really difficult. But once you are all finished with decorating, hoo boy, it takes forever, but we're done, it is then time to cast in our dice molds. So, just like with any blanks that I cast, I start by filling up my dice molds about half of the way or so with very well degassed resin. I try to get all of the visible bubbles out of my resin before I pour my resin into my molds. And then it is time to simply pop the blanks into their appropriate dice molds. This is pretty messy. It will get resin on your fingers, which is why, as anytime you're handling resin, you need to make sure that you are wearing gloves. And also make sure that you are positioning your dice blanks correctly in your dice molds, because you can get some very funky looking results if you misplace them, which I have done, I know from experience. So making sure everything is placed correctly. I also like to use a toothpick to kind of adjust the dice around and make sure they are sitting how they should. And then I do another round of degassing, getting rid of any bubbles, and it's time to put the caps on. I do get asked pretty frequently how the blanks position themselves, and honestly, as long as you have blanks that are proportioned well versus your actual dice, they should just position themselves really nicely in the molds and essentially be held in place by the inset of the numbers in the molds. 24 hours later, it is time to pop our molds out and start taking those caps and all of that excess flashing off. And this is what the sprue and flashing look like on my molds. They're called vented squish molds. I make them myself, and unfortunately, I don't really have a source for people to buy them. Sorry about that. But it's time for the fun part, actually seeing the results of the dice. So I'm then going to pop them out and slowly look them over, keeping my fingers crossed that they are pretty each time. And these guys were. So I will just leave you shortly to enjoy the demolding, and I'll be back to talk to you at the end. And the last step here is I just trim off the remainder of the flashing with a little pair of flush cutters so that the face is as clean as it can be, although of course these dice will be sanded and polished at a later time. But with that, we have finished the making of some bee dice, so I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye!